So, Rory, I know you've been dying to ask me so many questions about my performance in Blue Lights, which can finally be revealed, by the way. Season 2, Blue Lights.
I haven't actually caught it yet myself. I haven't watched season 1 either.
Oh, serious?
But I've seen the picture of you that you sent me sitting in the pub. And I don't know if I have much more to say about it. It looks like you fit the part well enough.
I'm surprised nobody in the public
expected to see more of you.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody in the public has noticed me yet. Maybe they haven't finished the series yet. Like, it hasn't really propelled me to the level of stardom I'd expected it would. But when you're a featured artist such as myself, you just keep your head down and just, serve the scene best you can. It's all I can do. I featured in 2 shots.
Featured in.
Yeah, 2 shots. Minimum 3 seconds. Maximum 3 seconds.
I can go on it's not your CV when you're an actor, it's your
portfolio.
My portfolio.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Tom, you've been around a wee bit in that department, haven't you?
I have an extensive portfolio. I'm kind of uncomfortable with people knowing what I look like. I was gonna say there's probably a scene where you'll see me, but I kind of don't. I like the anonymity. I like people not to know where I am or who I am. You know what I mean?
I like to lap up the stardom.
Oh, I know you do, you fucking whore.
I was gonna say, oh my god, I had this incredible feat of strength over the weekend. I had this massive bookcase in my bedroom, which was a bollocks to get in the first place. It's over 8 foot high. It's huge. I just woke up and was like, I'm getting this downstairs. So I managed to move this huge, over 8 foot bookcase.
Without killing yourself?
By myself. Yeah, out of my room, down the stairs.
I'm genuinely surprised.
All the way down to my drawing room. And
drawing room?
Yeah.
Drawing room.
My sketching.
This is a wee 2 up, 2 down terrace in Belfast.
My colouring in room. But when you're a big bear like me with big paws, I nearly died multiple times. Granted, I'd be found days later, with some sort of really sus hentai fan fiction clutched in my hands, rigor mortis.
The dog nibbling your leg.
Yeah, they can't remove it because I'm just buried with it. Some withering thighs or Game of Moans or the Da Vinci Chode or something like that. Anyway, we record now. Yeah, all good. Well, howdy there, Colonels and Cornheads. Much obliged to ye for coming back for this 7th episode of the Popcornhead podcast with your host, Popcornhead, or Gavin Goldrush Wilton, the Wanderer. Joining me, as usual, we have Rory Ricochet Moore.
Hello there.
And we have Tommy Bronco Brady of the Bronco Brady Gang. Welcome, partners.
I mean, mine pretty much couldn't sound any more like a gay sex thing. It's do you know what it reminds me of? What do you call the character in Power of the Dog who's the older gay man who's grooming?
And they're always talking about him.
It's Bronco Billy or something.
Yeah.
What the fuck's his name?
It's something like that.
Bronco Henry, is that it?
It might be. And Benedict Cumbersnatch is always stroking his saddle.
Yeah.
This longing,
When you think about it, it's actually a really homophobic film. Because it's putting forward this idea that the only way that people become gay is being groomed by an older gay man. It's a mad notion.
It's when Spacey got in trouble and he just decided, oh no, I'm gay.
Yeah. Distraction. Yeah. In politics, we call that a dead cat. Yeah. Throw a dead cat on the table and nobody's talking about what you were doing beforehand.
That would be quite shocking if you just fucked a dead cat on this table.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, you're going to be... Whatever you were talking about before is completely out the window and you're like, what the fuck is that thing?
So anyway, today we're delving into The Searchers. This is a film it's left an indelible mark on the world of cinema. It was directed by John Ford and it stars the controversial Hollywood relic John Wayne.
Relic.
Relic's the correct word.
Hollywood legend.
This film, it's a real gem from the golden age of Hollywood. It was released in 1956, and it's basically this epic tale set against the backdrop of the Texas Native American Wars of the 19th century. And the plot revolves around Ethan Edwards, who is a Confederate Civil War veteran who's propelled on this quest to track down his abducted niece. Film critic Roger Ebert, he described Ethan as being one of the most compelling characters Ford and Wayne ever created. His story is stark and lonely, a portrait of obsession, and in it we can see the inspiration for Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. Jean-Luc Godard, who was the pioneer of the French New Wave movement, which is like a French art film movement that emerged in the late 50s. It was like rejecting traditional filmmaking conventions anyway. He compared the film to Homer's Odyssey and would rank it as the fourth greatest American film of the sound era. The Searchers, it's more than just an adventure film. It's an exploration of the dark side of the West as well as obsession and its many facades.
Yeah, it's basically like a very, very competently executed piece of white supremacist propaganda.
I would argue against that.
Really?
Oh, big time.
Oh man, it is.
And I know many people would disagree with you on that.
I think it
Okay,
plays into
interesting.
that whole lost cause mythology of the good Confederates and the.
Yeah, massively.
But at the same time, it's one of my favorite films ever. And
But the most important thing...
It's a real. I'm not saying it's a bad film. I'm saying it's a good film, but it's white supremacist propaganda, in my opinion.
Well, the most important thing to remember when watching The Searchers is that John Wayne is not the good guy in the film. He is the antagonist of the film.
Okay. Maybe I'm going to cut all of that then.
Yeah, he's the antagonist.
Right.
He's not the protagonist.
he's also the protagonist.
Martin's
as
the
well.
protagonist. Wayne's the villain of the film.
I
We
think
will
he's
find out why.
No, I can
And
see why.
I know what you're saying. We'll find out why. As we journey with Ethan through the narrative, we encounter basically a world seething with racial bias and personal vengeance. It paints quite a raw and quite intimate picture of a man grappling with his inner turmoil, you know, forcing us to reevaluate our understanding of heroism, revenge, and what it actually means to be human.
I could mistake you for a half-breed.
That's your Uncle Ethan.
By Jiminy. Man says he's going one place, means to go t'other.
Mount, M-O-N-T-E, Mount! So he married a Comanche's swamp.
Living with Comanches ain't being alive.
These are my people.
You big shoulders. Oh, no, Nesby, not till I'm finished my clergium.
That'll be that day.
I do not want blood money.
If there's anything I can do, sir.
God forbid.
I ain't cut out to be no old maid.
Medicine country, huh?
I'll thank you to unhand my fiancé.
You know that's grounds for divorce in Texas. You're really rough.
To kick us all off here, we're going to take a wee look at the legendary film director John Ford, who he's pretty much celebrated as being one of the most pivotal and inspiring figures of American cinema. He was known for his work on iconic films such as The Grapes of Wrath, Stagecoach, The Searchers, The Quiet Man, My Darling Clementine, and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, among many others. His substantial contributions to the cinematic world, it influenced countless filmmakers, and it helped shape the perception of American cinema in a lot of ways. You know, esteemed directors like Ingmar Bergman, Hitchcock, Akira Kurosawa, Scorsese, Spielberg, George Lucas, Sergio Leone, Orson Welles, even Kubrick, they were all deeply influenced by Ford. Now, Ford, as a guy, he was a known eccentric with a pretty forceful personality. He wore these dark sunglasses and an eye patch, and he smoked a pipe, and he would chew handkerchiefs while filming, going through about 12 handkerchiefs a day. He would blare music on set and would always break for tea in the afternoon for a wee cup of Earl Grey. He hated bad language. Like, if you were to use bad language in front of a woman, you would expect to be thrown off set immediately. He would...
But like he would regularly punch them in the face in public as well.
There's a lot of bigotry in this
Yeah,
podcast.
yeah,
Yeah, I think the Reverend's right, don't you?
You think the reverence. What does a quarter-breed Cherokee know about the old Comanche trick of sleeping with his best pony tied right by his side?
So Ford, he would stay relatively sober while they were filming, but once production
Relatively.
yeah, but once production wrapped, he would like lock himself away in his big cluttered study for his solitary drinking binge. He despised despised studio executives, and he made this known very vocally on set. They would not be allowed anywhere near him. Fair play. Like, it's like on the outside, he was a hard bastard, you know, a hard drinker, a tough guy you wouldn't really want to cross. But in reality, he was in some ways, you know, he was very intelligent. He could be quite sentimental and also sensitive at the same time. His work, it often challenged societal perceptions of masculinity, and he had a knack for revealing a softer side to the tough characters. And this is like, you think about the time this is taking place in, it was hard to come by. And it was particularly evident in his portrayal of John Wayne. Now, Ford's directorial style, it was pretty unique and distinctive. His films often featured outsiders, loners with this strong sense of camaraderie and American aesthetics. You know, he was known for these stunning landscapes and big long shots of natural surroundings. He never storyboarded his films. Basically, once the script was finished, it was rarely rewritten. He was one of the first directors to sort of encourage actors and writers to consider a full backstory to the characters, which is obviously quite common nowadays in filmmaking. His use of camera was generally pretty static. He would allow a scene to unfold in sort of medium or long shots, so when the camera did go to like move into like a close-up, it had like a real impact. He was, however, known for having these big, ambitious and thrilling tracking shots as well. Now, while filming, he was incredibly efficient and a disciplinarian, tough on the actors. He was described as the only man who could make John Wayne cry. He's referred to John Wayne as a big idiot. He's even punched Henry Fonda in the face.
John Wayne called him Pappy, right? They seem to have this kind of weird codependent relationship. Wayne, I think in Ford's final years, he kind of takes care of him and stuff.
Right.
They have this kind of like weird on again, off again relationship. And it seems kind of like Ford sort of holds Wayne back in his career.
Yeah.
Because, you know, he could have cast him in films a lot earlier than he did. And he only eventually cast him whenever he's like getting a little bit older in Stagecoach. And you can see the influence that film and that performance has on other films in the future, because
hugely influential.
He comes on like firing. What is he like? Hip firing and lever action rifle,
yes,
and spinning it round to reload, which is exactly what happens in one of the Terminator movies.
Yes,
there's a scene that's just like recreated in one of the Terminator films.
Stagecoach was a really important film. Yeah.
And that kind of launches his career as like a leading man. That's his first breakout performance in this ensemble cast in a John Ford movie. But he'd known Ford for years and years beforehand. Like, he'd been working with him since the 20s. And it seems like Ford kind of wanted to keep Wayne for himself. Like, he saw this like hot prop guy carrying shit about the set, and he was like, this guy's mine. And then he would like actively shit talk him to other directors so that he couldn't get parts, like, you know, like bigger parts. And he would keep him as like an extra and like a prop man and stuff for like way longer than he would have otherwise. And then eventually,
it's kind of toxic.
It's so toxic. Like, they have a really toxic relationship.
Yeah.
And another funny thing is that they set up this like drinking society for themselves called the Young Men's Purity, Total Abstinence and Yachting Association.
Yachting.
I know. And like,
there's so much that doesn't make sense.
I know. So like, basically it was, you know, a drinking club that was the opposite of all of those things.
Masqueraded as
like I think they did kind of like go boating, but I think it was basically so that they could get down to Mexico to go to like whorehouses and shit.
Cross the border to Tijuana.
Yeah, that kind of shit. Wayne's first wife, not very happy about any of this.
But yeah, despite all this with Ford, actors really did respect him. They would acknowledge that he was good at bringing out the best in their performances. John Wayne, he once said, no one could manage actors on a crew quite like Ford. He loved filming in Monument Valley, even if it wasn't like appropriate to the setting. It was all just about that visual impact, you know. And Ford, he's produced some of the most definitive images of the American West. Orson Welles, he claimed that like other filmmakers, they basically refused to shoot in Monument Valley because they feared plagiarism, basically, because it was so akin to Ford.
And it is so iconic.
Yeah, magnificent images.
Some of the shots, especially early on in the film, are beautiful.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Amazing.
I'm looking at The Searchers. The Searchers is what? The Great Plains of Texas, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Monument Valley. Yeah. Is it in Utah?
But it's not set in Utah or in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
They're in Texas.
But he'll just use Monument
Exactly.
Valley for that purpose. Just 'cause it's
And
so
anybody who knows
stunning.
any geography of America knows they're not in Texas.
Yeah. They're playing fast and loose with a lot of stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into.
So now we're going to take a look at the film's leading man, the iconic and highly controversial Marion Robert Morrison, or as he's better known, John Wayne. He was the icon of Hollywood's golden age. He was the definitive cowboy, a man who for many people embodied that frontier heritage of America. He was one of the top box office draws for 3 decades, and he's basically considered one of the greatest stars of classic American cinema. He would become a star right before World War II, following that collab he did with Stagecoach in 1939.
He was born Marion Robert Morrison, but then basically like his mother liked his brother more than him and gave his brother his name, his younger brother. She took Robert out of Wayne's name
Right.
and gave it to his younger brother. So his brother is called Robert Morrison. He, after that point, was called Marion Mitchell Morrison.
Wow.
So he's like
Triple M.
Eminem.
Triple
Yeah, like Eminem.
It's like Prince changing his name flat out. CeeLo Green.
Yeah. He seems to have like had a terrible relationship with his mother, which
That's what it makes
perhaps
sense in the long run.
informs what happens later on.
Yeah.
It seems like later in Wayne's life, he became very like ashamed of himself because he didn't serve in World War II at all. And people would constantly ask him afterwards, it was like a real hot button issue. Like, what about your war record? What were you doing?
Yeah, 'cause you
like,
had,
why didn't you help
like
the
John
boys
Ford,
or whatever?
James Stewart and all were heavily involved.
Jimmy
World War
Stewart
II.
is flying fucking like bombing missions
Yeah,
over
yeah.
Europe. Like one of the most dangerous jobs.
Yeah.
Like he could have got a cushy job. I can't remember if it's him or there's another
Jimmy
wild.
Stewart flying a plane as
No.
George from It's a Wonderful Life would be
I think it
I
was.
got bomb here.
It was.
I got bomb Fred's house. Bell's house.
It was either him or another guy. Who I
Cary
forgot.
Grant?
Yes.
Yeah,
So it was
yeah.
either him or Cary Grant was like in the gunner's seat
Wow.
in a bomber. If you've ever seen those old B-52 bombers, there's like a little glass dome at the bottom with a machine gun in it, and that's where he was. It's like
wow.
one of the most dangerous
Imagine
jobs you
Cary
could possibly
Grant down
imagine.
there,
Yeah, just like screaming.
I got a bunch of Germans down here.
The Germans have got me on their sides.
He has the best transatlantic accent of all time, Cary Grant.
Yeah, so John Ford is working in the OSS, and
Wow.
Wayne is constantly being like, just let me do like 3 more movies and then I'll be right there. I'll sign up just after I get this movie finished. I'll be there.
I'll be out in a minute.
Yeah. So he's like constantly putting it off and being like, just one more movie. So he's effectively like, he is basically dodging the draft. There's some controversy about this. Initially, he gets a dispensation because he has a wife and family, but he's literally like in the process of divorcing her. And
Right. Did he sort of postpone that a bit?
yeah, he's like, don't sign the papers just yet until the war's over, kind of thing. So he's in the process of divorcing his wife, but he's using that as an excuse where other married actors in that position did go and fight. And also, it's interesting that like him and Gary Cooper, who are like
Yeah, Gary
the
Cooper, the
archetypical
strong,
silent type, who are this picture of masculinity on the screen. Both of them
Did he
didn't
not go
fucking
with it?
fight. Yeah, both of them, when it was
Push
time
comes
to
to
put your
shove.
money where your mouth
Yeah.
is, they backed out. Whereas other guys who were like less performative in their masculinity on screen did go and fight, which I think is very
That
interesting.
was interesting.
Just for some confirmation on what you said, Jimmy Stewart was in charge of Bomber Command at the time, and he's the bomber one. Clark Gable didn't serve, neither did Gary Cooper or obviously John Wayne.
Yeah, no, I don't know who. I forget who it is.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart.
I think
is-
Cagney also serves.
But Jimmy
like-
Stewart's definitely an American hero. Like he's
Is it him who becomes a general at one point?
Everybody loves Jimmy Stewart. The man's
Absolutely.
untouchable.
But yeah, anyway, it's also funny that Wayne submits this job application to the OSS, which is where Ford is working.
It's the CIA
And
later on.
it's like the precursor to the CIA, and he wants to do kind of like a glamorous job. Like, he doesn't want to go into the army as a private because this is like later on in the war.
He wants to be like a James Bond.
Yeah,
kind of guy.
exactly. He thinks it's beneath him to like go into the army as a private and doesn't want to do that. So he's like, give me like a sexy role. I think he suggests small boat work or something. You're like running guns past the German naval blockade, but he never actually ends up doing it.
Yeah.
But his application is really funny because he's like talking about the experience he has, you know, how he has like boating experience and stuff. Like, it's very funny. He puts down like his aptitude for tennis or something as well. He's like tennis and racket sports fair.
Yeah.
But then
Fair,
Ford,
he's honest about it.
yeah, I know, it's hilarious. And then Ford is constantly badgering him, like, why are you not serving? And like never lets him forget it, basically, after this. But at the same time, Ford's going to Wild Bill Donovan, who's like the head of the OSS, and shit-talking Wayne, being like, don't hire this guy. You know, it's something that he does repeatedly throughout Wayne's career.
Yeah, just more of that toxic relationship.
Yeah.
No matter what happens.
So he's like giving him shit for not joining up, but then like actively trying to sabotage him getting into the OSS, which like, I mean, maybe it's understandable because Wayne doesn't seem to be like the brightest tool in the shed, you know what I mean? So like maybe you wouldn't want him in like the Secret Service.
He would tour some of the US military bases and hospital around the South Pacific.
Yeah, but I think he basically does that for about 3 weeks. There's other celebrities that do a lot more of that who couldn't serve.
Yeah, but it seems to be that lack of involvement. It seemed to really drive him to become that super patriot that he was known as, you know, to sort of atone for staying at home during that.
And he'll claim that, oh, I couldn't go because I had this shoulder injury and
Me shoulder.
you know, like
McGregor. me fit. But don't get me fit.
Yeah, so the story goes that he used to do like body surfing when he was younger, when he like
bodyboarding.
well,
Boogie
yeah.
boarding.
Boogie boarding.
It's
All
basically,
right.
like, as I understand it, it's like a sort of poor man's surfing where you don't have a surfboard, but you want to be a beach bum in California.
Wait.
So you're just like throwing yourself into the wave and like surfing
I
the
think
shore.
I'd be like
I was
that.
about to say, Gavin, I think you could understand
There's a
that.
lot of me to get up on a surf. I can't get up on a surfboard.
I couldn't imagine you
There's
standing
too
on
much
a
of me to get up on a surfboard.
I've done it once and nearly died. And I've never been rushing back.
I'm a wee bodyboarder.
Yeah.
I just kick my legs and just try and cast the wave.
You're wee dip your toes in and then skirt it again.
Yeah, there was the only time I've stood up on a surfboard. I immediately fell off and like got sucked into like a riptide. And
Jesus Christ.
so I was like down underwater, and then as I was coming back up again, the board came round the
Slapped
wave
you?
and slapped me on the top of the head
God.
and knocked me back down again. So I was like, this is how I die. I was like 14 or something, and I was like, this is it.
Is this it?
And, like,
Yeah.
you know, by the time I got to the surface, I was breathing
Not
like a
dead.
madman. Yeah, but like my lungs were like burning, and I was like, never again. I don't. Drowning's a terrifying way to die, and I don't want to be anywhere near that experience ever again.
It's meant to be peaceful at the end. They say it's meant to be. You
Oh, I don't want to get that
Any-
far.
sense of
any-
euphoria.
Any like asphyxiation of oxygen will give you a sense of euphoria.
we know all
like,
about that.
That's what.
Sound experienced.
You're from like that Kill Bill actor. What do you call him, David Carradine or
Are we talking about autoerotic asphyxiation?
correct?
Yeah. So like from what I've been told, it makes it all the better when you come. I've been led to believe that's why people do it. But also, you know, like those nosh things, like the little canister things that people inhale. That's just like replacing oxygen with nitrogen.
Yeah.
And like you know, if you did that for long enough, you'd pass out. But the euphoria feeling that you get from taking that drug is just asphyxiation, basically, like controlled asphyxiation.
That's it. Wayne, he was always described as a man who really defined what it meant to be a motion picture actor, you know, this formidable presence. John Ford, he once said that Wayne, he basically wasn't governed by acting rules. He just portrayed John Wayne, this rugged American guy. Like, there was no method acting. It was just, he was real and he was natural. And you could say, there's a lot of similar actors, contemporary actors as well, you could say. They basically do just sort of play themselves.
Yeah.
Examples like The Rock is an obvious one.
Yeah.
People like Bruce Willis, even like Morgan Freeman to an extent.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
he's cast as Morgan Freeman, basically, you know.
Yeah.
Even like Will Smith. Harrison Ford is one you could even say as well.
Yeah.
And to an extent,
There's some ones that are even more so.
yeah, like Owen Wilson, Danny DeVito, and
Yeah.
even Jack Nicholson to an extent, more contemporary Jack Nicholson
Yeah,
rather than like
yeah,
early
yeah,
Jack
yeah.
Nicholson. You know,
Yeah.
they're hired because they are who they are,
Yeah.
rather than who can you become
Yeah.
as a character. You
I'm
know what I
thinking
mean?
of Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman.
The bucket list.
Yeah.
What do you call his character?
I miss Jack Nicholson.
I know.
I think that was his last.
know.
No, I think he'd one weird one after that. But it's been like over 10 years since he's been in the film. I do miss him.
He did. Whereabouts is About Schmidt in his.
That was like 2002, I
That was
believe.
so funny.
Yeah, great. But in 1964, John Wayne, he had most of his left lung removed, I assume through like lung cancer or something, and
Oh yeah, he on the set of The Conqueror,
in which he plays Genghis Khan.
an incredibly racist depiction of Genghis Khan. Like it's a wildly racist
Yeah.
film. And they're shooting it in the desert. It looks nothing like Mongolia or where, you know, like, and he looks nothing like a Mongolian warlord. And they're shooting it like 100 miles downwind of the atomic bomb testing site.
Is that the original test
Yeah,
site?
yeah,
where, like,
yeah.
the
Where
Oppenheimer
Oppenheimer is doing. I
Wow,
assume
yeah,
that's
yeah.
where it is.
That's what I thought it was.
And
yeah.
but regardless, America is testing nuclear weapons, and they're downwind from it.
Yeah.
And they ask the government, like, "Are we sweet to film there?" And the government's like, "Yeah, it's fine."
It's a bit of a
and-
mug off, isn't it?
Yeah. And it ends up like irradiating basically the whole crew of the film.
Everyone who worked in the film basically die of cancer.
Half of them, I think it's like 20 years later or something, half of them have cancer and a quarter of them have died
Yeah.
already.
That's crazy.
And Wayne, yes, he was like smoking cigars constantly and stuff, which probably didn't help. Like that could be where he got lung cancer. But like he ends up dying of stomach cancer, which is probably because of the massive dose of radiation he got on
Yeah.
that film set.
That's it. Like, yeah, he would have most of the left lung removed, and the director Howard Hawks, who was that fucking crazy guy, he believed it made.
That crazy guy.
He's a we'll get into some more things. He's a crazy guy. He's the guy, you know, in The Simpsons when Mr. Burns is going crazy at the casino, like his nails are really long. He's like, Smithers,
Yes.
up in the spruce. That's based off Howard Hawks. Like,
Yeah, he like cocks the handgun. He's like,
get in.
hop in.
Certainly, sir. And the jars of urine?
Oh, we'll hang on to those. Now, to the plant. We'll take the spruce moose. Hop in.
But, sir,
we'll get into him another time.
Yeah.
He believed like Wayne getting a lot of his left lung removed, it made him a better actor, explaining that like as a result of this, he would like read his lines differently, like pausing in stranger places because he didn't have the breath to like carry on, which you can sort of pick up in like his later roles, you know. And Hawks, he found this effective because like you never knew what was coming next, you know, and what he was saying.
Yeah. And Wayne, as we discussed, he had like a shoulder injury, which is why it's part of the reason why he has this really weird walk. He's got
the
incredibly
John Wayne
strange
The
gait.
swagger of Wayne.
Where like he's sort of stooped on one side a little bit.
Yeah.
And I've also heard that he has very small feet.
Yes.
For such a large man, like he's 6'3" or something. He's giant. He's huge. Really wide shoulders and everything. Tiny feet.
Tiny wee
So he's like
Tiny
tottering
feet.
about.
That would explain it, yeah. But yeah, when John Ford, when he watched John Wayne's performance in Howard Hawks' film Red River, which was his early 40s, he basically just said, I never knew that son of a bitch could actually act.
Yeah, he basically infers like I would have cast him earlier on if I thought he could act.
Director Raoul Walsh, he noted how Wayne would underact and how effective it could be. It's not that he was trying to underact, he simply couldn't overact to any degree. Gene Hackman, he's described Wayne as one of the greatest actors of all time, noting his command in every scene and his charisma. John Wayne, he was more than just an iconic actor. He became a symbol of what much of the public considered to be American values and ideals. He was a national hero to a large degree.
Yeah, I have a slightly contradictory take to something in your opening monologue about Wayne and Ford to a certain extent. Basically, like, the thing about Wayne, the thing about him being that archetype, it comes about as a result of this movement after the American men start to be kind of domesticated, and like less and less of them are working in manual jobs, or, you know, the kind of thing they would have been doing in the Old West, you know, around the start of the 20th century. And Theodore Roosevelt, he's like, how are we going to make these men into men? Kind of. Roosevelt has this whole weird story himself where he goes from like a fancy lad to cosplaying as a cowboy and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So he has this whole thing going on.
There's definitely a film. I think it's called Rough Riders. It's sort of about Teddy Roosevelt and all that. I think Magnum P.I.'s in it.
Oh, wow.
And Sam Elliott. I'd actually love to see it.
I love Sam Elliott. But you've
very
got this
special guest star, Sam Elliott.
So you've got these like nervous, middle class, white Christian Americans who are like feeling kind of emasculated. They're very concerned that they're not fitting into this kind of archetype of masculinity.
Yeah, the romanticized version of
that.
Yeah,
it's interesting as well because the concept of masculinity changes around this time, where they kind of reject the Victorian era ideals of masculinity, and it also has a strain in Christianity where they're rejecting the Orthodox version of Jesus Christ. You know, it's like Jesus Christ like helps the sick and the poor and like feeds people and stuff, and they're like, that's fucking girl shit.
Yeah.
Why is he not kicking ass and taking names? You know what I mean? So this movement develops. It's called like muscular Christianity.
Right. Oh, wow.
And this is kind of where you get Wayne coming to the fore as like an archetype of muscular Christianity, because it's these nervous, middle-class American men who are working in jobs that aren't manly as they see it.
Yeah.
And they're like projecting them.
Image.
They're projecting this image like, you know, if I had been born in a different era, that would have been me.
Yeah.
You know, about John Wayne in these Western films where he like does whatever he wants with no regard to whatever anyone else thinks, and he's like manhandling women and, you know, like shooting anyone who's not white the first chance he gets or whatever. You know what I mean?
But yeah, it got to basically the point in his career where he would have to like really carefully select his roles so that the roles wouldn't compromise this off-screen image that he had in the American public. And in 1975, the Emperor Hirohito of Japan, he requested to meet John Wayne when he visited the US, and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had two requests when he visited the United States: go to Disneyland and meet John Wayne.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah. It just shows like the worldwide appeal of this man at that time.
The,
it was
the cultural significance of
it.
it.
It's incredible.
Rightly or wrongly. And he influenced generations of men into this, I would say, impoverished vision of what masculinity is.
Yeah. My dad has a friend whose nickname is the Duke. He's a spit of John Wayne.
That's
you know
so
what
funny.
I mean? Yeah.
That's so funny.
But so like in the early 70s, you know, with the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement bringing sort of tensions to a boil in the US, it appeared that the tragic figure that Wayne had portrayed in The Searchers had started to really materialize in real life. Wayne would basically go off on this tirade. I think it was in Playboy magazine that would completely tarnish his modern legacy. And he said, and I quote, "With a lot of blacks, there's quite a bit of resentment along with their descent, and possibly rightfully so. But we can't all of a sudden get down on our knees and turn everything over to the leadership of the blacks. I believe in white supremacy until the blacks are educated to a point of responsibility." He didn't stop there.
Yeah, did he?
He went on to say, "I don't feel we did wrong in taking this country away from the Indians. Our so-called stealing of this country from them was just a matter of survival. There were great numbers of people who needed new land, and the Indians were selfishly trying to keep it for themselves."
selfishly trying to keep their own land for themselves.
Yeah, like these words.
Incredible.
These words, they draw strong parallels between Wayne and Ethan Edwards, two men who have completely outlived their usefulness. I know we're skipping ahead a bit here, but if you look at the very final shot of The Searchers, Ethan, he's standing outside the family
Great
home.
fucking shot, though.
Is it so similar to the
Standing
first shot as
outside,
well? Yeah.
bitter, spiteful, unwelcome, and he turns away and disappears off into the wasteland. His real home being this idea or myth of a country long forgotten. To be a man like Ethan Edwards or even Wayne shows us that being this sort of man can only really lead to misery. So, John Wayne, the way I look at it is like people get asked, like, can you believe what John Wayne said? And it's like, yeah, I can. Because he belonged to an entire generation who got on like that. Yeah,
Lots of people were saying it back then. His parents are probably saying it to him. And you know, like,
Yeah, Wayne goes on to be this rabid supporter of the war in Vietnam, probably because of his shame. He makes a film, Sands of Iwo Jima, which is very popular during the war, but he never actually serves, and he feels insecure about this for the rest of his life, basically. And John Ford regularly reinforces his insecurity, needling him about it constantly. And, you know, other people as well asking him about his war record, like, what did you do? So to kind of like wash away this sin, he becomes rabidly anti-communist.
Yeah, Captain America.
Yeah. And produces this like ridiculous propaganda film. It's called The Green Berets. It's based on...
I haven't seen it.
I haven't seen it either.
My dad has definitely seen it.
We need to watch it. Apparently there is some good action scenes in it and stuff, but like...
I know of it.
It's not, but like, it's nonsense, basically.
Yeah.
You know, it's based on a novel, but interestingly, it was the first time that the government, like the military, cooperated with Hollywood on a film. This has become very common now.
That says it all, really.
Yeah, exactly. Like it is a straight up propaganda film, and they give the film like good deals and stuff on the equipment they use in exchange for total script rewriting control. So the Pentagon has the final say.
Final cut?
Yeah. And makes them do a load of rewrites and stuff.
Right, okay.
Like this happens a lot nowadays in war films.
Yeah.
You know, in exchange for us giving you like the tanks or equipment or whatever for free to use, we get final say on the script.
A recent example I can think of just quickly is that one American Sniper. The
Oh,
Clint Eastwood one.
Jesus Christ.
terrible film.
It's
I-
really
awful
poor.
film.
It's very poor.
It's a stain on
It is
Bradley
propaganda.
Cooper's
Yeah,
legacy.
yeah.
Oh, it is wild propaganda.
Yeah. Like, they're not even
what's
hiding.
that?
They're not even hiding it. You know.
There's a couple of ones about like bomb detectors around
Yeah,
the same time. I didn't like either of them.
All Catherine Bigelow films are nonsense as well.
Zero
Like,
Dark 30.
Yeah,
It's funny.
she completely like rewrites the story. So like that's what the popular conception of the raid to kill Bin Laden is, that film. But that film has very little resemblance to what actually happened in real life.
You mean in like the build up to finding him?
The whole thing, the whole raid.
I think the actual raid was pretty accurate.
It's not like
funny
that.
that Bin Laden was just like chilling in his house.
Yeah.
time.
In Pakistan. There's so much fucking interesting shit with Al Qaeda and like Pakistan intelligence and stuff. It's crazy.
I just thought of an interesting wee parallel. So that it's going back a wee bit on what Tom said a wee minute ago. John Wayne and his shame at not serving during the Second World War. It's very similar. And especially in Southern mythology, John Wilkes Booth didn't serve in the Confederacy and felt such great shame that that's what motivated him and the conspirators to then shoot
Was
Lincoln.
that because he was being an actor?
It was because he was being an actor.
Yeah,
very
actor.
much
Yeah,
like
yeah.
John Wayne, who's an actor, you know. So and John
Yeah,
Wayne
also-
being
I didn't. I thought I assumed he did serve. I just assumed.
didn't serve, and that's what that's always the implication was. John Wilkes Booth extreme guilt was why he went on to then shoot Lincoln.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, like, there was a conspiracy to kill him. Like, it wasn't a lone gunman. There was a plan by...
A bunch of idiots, though, basically.
Yeah,
when it
yeah,
came
yeah.
down to it, they weren't the most competent bunch.
Yeah, well, they still shot him. Like,
That's all true. They're also supposed to shoot somebody else, and somebody else in Lincoln's cabinet was supposed to get shot at the same time, and your boy chickened out. And got shot himself.
yeah,
I'm pretty
I
sure.
remember this.
So
But
anyway,
we're so off topic.
Green Berets, something, Green Berets.
They shot the Green Berets in Fort Bragg, so it's like very obviously not Vietnam. It's in like a pine forest or something.
Oh, right, okay.
yeah. And they what else?
That's sort of
did
like
they do?
when Kubrick, he shot Full Metal Jacket in London.
What?
Yeah. It
Holy
was
shit.
all on sets. All
That's
sets.
crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
But they put up like trees and
Yeah,
shit,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
So much of Full Metal Jacket's on base as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
But then just like populated like urban areas, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
But yeah, also with the Green Berets, it's based on a book, but it's nothing to do with the book because the book was written by a guy, this like quasi-journalist who like embeds with the Green Berets, but he also like goes through training and is fighting alongside them. So it's like, you know, not particularly good for your journalistic integrity if you're like one of them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you could really call it journalism at that point, but he gives away a bunch of government secrets that they don't want to be out there, and the government nearly prosecutes him. But eventually they kind of, you know, clean it up with the movie that is a complete rewrite and has nothing to do with what they actually did. And people will say that it's like a great depiction, like certain people at the time, who I think Douglas MacArthur says it's like a great depiction of the Green Berets.
We could talk about Douglas MacArthur last time.
Real piece of shit. But he said something like Wayne embodies the Green Berets better than the Green Berets or something like that. Like some bullshit like that. Like, but it is just, you know, a propaganda film.
Yeah.
You know, it depicts them like building houses and giving soap to needy, you know, Vietnamese
aid workers.
Yeah. And I think there's possibly a scene where like a village have built like a small Eiffel Tower, not Eiffel Tower, but a small Statue of Liberty, and you know it's like, oh, we need to protect these poor people. But like the impact of the movie, it does obviously convince some young men to go and fight and die in Vietnam, but the impact is kind of muted because evidence of the My Lai massacre comes out not too long after the film. So, you know, what they were actually doing, like, you know, instead of saving the villagers, they were like setting fire to the villages and stuff and like massacring civilians. You know, there's a bunch of massacres. Like My Lai's just the famous one, but there's like a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's not good.
So what about John Wayne?
Fuck.
Where do you begin?
I don't even know. Like, he always was married to Catholic Latin American women. He had three wives, I think, and all three of them were and if you wanted to take a negative view of this, it's like because they wouldn't divorce him if he was sleeping around on them constantly, potentially. And he and Ford...
Sounds very multicultural to me.
Yeah, it's a weird, like, he was definitely racist, but there's this weird kind of like...
duality.
Yeah.
It's not really intense bigotry. I've seen it in real life where you get these older men and they're extremely racist towards foreign men, but foreign women, no problem.
Oh, they're all over them like
All
a cheap
over
suit.
them. All
Good-looking
over them.
ones.
Yeah, and I think it's some like really fucked up dichotomy they have in their head where it's like, I'm saving them from their like barbaric men
All the
who are going to do
savages.
horrible things to them or whatever, you know. But anyway, maybe he gets this from his mentor Ford, but loves punching women in the face. Can't get enough of punching women in the face. Like, there's a story.
I mean,
about,
not uncommon for that generation.
Not uncommon for that generation, but it seems like he was more, you know, you see it in films depicted a lot where they're like, you know, like a backhanded slap or something like that. But he's like fully punching them in the face. Like, you know.
Roy, I'm just thinking of McClintock right now.
An awful lot of that.
Yeah. So
Taming of the Shrew.
there's one
Wayne does Shakespeare.
Jesus Christ. God. So yeah, there's a story from basically he has an affair with this actress, Marlene Dietrich, that's who Bridget von Hammersmark in Inglourious Bastards is based on.
Yeah, Diane Kruger.
Yeah, Diane Kruger plays her. Awesome actress. But she's the one that Tarantino insisted on choking himself in the scene at the end where Christoph Waltz is choking her to death.
Step aside, Christoph, I've got this.
Yeah. Tarantino was like, it has to be my hands on the throat. Fucking freak. Anyway, So then Wayne is like constantly in public punching women in the face. And there's a story from the set of a movie that he's working on with Dietrich, who's having an affair with at this point. And she's kind of like the older woman who's like showing him the ropes, and he's like the young, inexperienced cowboy or whatever.
Right.
This is like off screen what's going on basically, and based on the testimony of like from interviews with one of the other women who was on the set, there's this weird fucking scene that goes down where she's like testing him and needling him and like pushing him, and then he just snaps at one point and just like fully haymakers her,
right?
Like full or whatever it is, like hits her with like a proper punch and knocks her to the ground, and she like effectively gets up. It kind of reminds me of, you know, the character in Archer, the secretary. What do you call it? Like Cheryl or Carol?
Oh yeah.
She effectively is like, "You got another one in you, big boy," and then like kisses him, but like,
you'll just have to fucking kill me.
Yeah, I think that the theory is that like to preserve her power or status or something, she had to like take it on the chin, as it were.
So yet another toxic relationship.
Yeah, horrifying. Yeah. Horrifying shit. She had to like play it off to like maintain her status or whatever. Like, very weird and fucked up. But anyway, we talked about Wayne divorcing his first wife during the war, and he meets a teenager who's the daughter of like the brothel keeper in Mexico. I think it's or like the madam.
The madam, that's a good the madam.
And he takes her teenage daughter to America and marries her,
right? And
like moves her into an apartment in Hollywood. And there's like some speculation that part of the reason he was doing it, like he claims that he was like in love with the teenager.
When you say teenager,
we don't know exactly what age she was, but she was like 17 or younger.
Okay.
It's fucked up enough that he knows he has to like lie to people and tell them that she's like 24.
Right.
So like he knows what he's doing is fucked up. So she must be pretty fucking young.
He's not a gentleman like Elvis where he waits till she turns of age, you know. Tells her parents when she's 12, I want to marry her and make her wait for me.
He's well into his 30s by this point. And this causes some consternation in Hollywood. Like Hollywood does not like this very much, and you know she wants to become an actor and like a star in Hollywood, and Hollywood basically is not having this, and it doesn't happen. I think she's called Chata or something.
Right.
She goes by. It's not a real name, but there's some speculation that he was using it as like a tax dodge. Mm-hmm. You know, like he has her moved into an apartment that's paid for by the studio, and the studio pays her a salary every month, and because he's such a big star, he can get away with this, and the studio is like, yeah, fuck it, we have to do it, you know. So there's some speculation that he was using this as a way to take some of his salary tax free or something.
Yeah.
God knows. But anyway, that's an interesting little you know, a little bit of color on the it's not a particularly unusual thing in this era as well. Like child marriage still happens in America in some places. Do you remember we used to have that record of Marty Robbins? You were like the gunfighter ballads.
Yeah, one of the greatest albums ever made.
Yeah, on the sleeve of the record, you get this weird story. It's meant to be like this heartfelt story about how Marty Robbins meets his wife when she was like 15 and he's like a full adult.
Yeah, like that seems to be like a common, like I said with Elvis.
Yeah.
It's like he met Priscilla when she was very young and he basically said to her parents, I'll marry her when she's of age. Like,
if you're her parents,
I think it's probably more
like,
common.
Does that make it better?
I think it's probably more common. Like, it's definitely like if it's a fucked up generational thing. It's simply because these guys are in the limelight. People think like, oh my god, I can't believe he did that. But it was probably fucking way more common than you'd think it was.
Yeah,
you know?
Definitely, it definitely was. It was a lot more common, but that doesn't make it any less.
Oh, absolutely,
crazy and fucked up.
Of course,
like a 35-year-old and a 16-year-old is wild.
That's less than half his age.
Yeah,
it's definitely not okay.
But also like Wayne. He was so avidly anti-communist. He was a big supporter of the House Un-American Activities Committee.
Oh my god! So if you've seen Oppenheimer, you know what these guys are.
Yeah.
They're like dragging anyone who could plausibly be fingered as being like left of center into
God
a room
forbid.
and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
sweating them. It's during the it's the second Red Scare, I believe, in
Yeah.
America, where they're basically purging anyone who could be like suspected of being a communist.
Yeah. Your man Dalton Trumbo, the
Yes,
writer?
yes.
There was a film came out about that with Bryan Cranston in the past few years, and a guy plays John Wayne in the film. I think there's a part where classic John Wayne either punches him in the face or tries to punch him in the face.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because Wayne never informs to the committee, but Reagan fucking couldn't get enough of it. Like, Reagan was informing on everyone.
Fear of communist subversive activities has developed into hysterical frenzy which grows daily. Next on the list of witnesses is Ronald Reagan.
I watched the new Fallout series.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
I really enjoyed. Like, it's not perfect.
See, I haven't played the game, so
You don't need to have played the games. It is very good. But there's some really good social satire, and there's a character in it who is kind of John Wayne, but also it's maybe like an amalgamation, because John Wayne famously was not very good at cowboy stuff. couldn't fucking lasso something to save his life. But there was
But
a
he's
guy.
very good on a horse for his size. They
Oh,
always said he was a
absolutely.
brilliant
Yeah.
horseman for how
Yeah.
massive he
Absolutely.
was.
Yeah.
There's things that he could do. Like, obviously, he could do that cool trick with the rifle.
Yes, spinning and good at spins.
Yeah. So, like, there were some things that he was genuinely very good at.
A show cowboy.
But there was certain things that he was not so good at, because he was not a real cowboy. Because previously in the 40s and whatever, before Wayne became a star, the cowboys on screen were actual cowboys. Like, they were real life cowboys. And Wayne was kind of like the first one that wasn't. He was like imitating a cowboy.
What's your guy that did all the shows? Wild Bill Hickok.
Yeah, he did some
Yeah.
shows. He sort of turned about.
He's in Deadwood, is he not?
Yes, indeed, yeah.
But anyway, so in Fallout, there's a character who partially seems like he's based on John Wayne. They take a little bit of that kind of like anti-communist Red Scare era, and there's this guy who's like, in the first scene, you have him appearing at like this rich family's child's birthday party, playing as the cowboy, and he overhears the guy who's hired him talking to one of his friends. One of his friends like, "What's he doing? Like, isn't that such and such? Isn't that like famous guy Cooper?" He's
Definitely
like,
pulled off Gary Cooper.
Yeah. And he's like, what's he doing here? And he's like, alimony, of course. Like, he's paying his ex-wife. And over the course of the TV show, you find out that his ex-wife, the reason why he's there at that time, his ex-wife is working for this evil corporation that's like starting the nuclear war so that they can benefit from everyone going into these vaults underground.
Right, okay.
And it's a really, really interesting story, but it sort of tracks his evolution.
Is that the Walton
radiation
Goggins play that
yeah,
character?
Walton
I've seen a few
Goggins.
images. Yeah,
Walton Goggins' performance is fantastic.
Well, back when I was in the Marines, they taught us that if they ever drop a really big bomb, they told us to hold up your thumb just like this. And if the cloud is smaller than your thumb, then you run for the hills.
And if it's bigger than your thumb?
They told us not to bother running.
It's an interesting modern subversion of the Western genre.
Absolutely.
Because then he goes on to be this gunslinger in the like post-apocalyptic New West, but you also get his evolution from this John Wayne type anti-communist figure, because he plays this sheriff, and there's a scene where they're shooting and he finds out that one of the writers has been like hauled away because turned out he was a communist. So he's been axed from the show.
That's a direct link there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So one of the writers on the movie has been fired and like dragged out because he was communist by like the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he's complaining about his lines because he's like, do I have to shoot the guy? Because the scene is him like he's beating this baddie, the guy's lying on the ground, and in the script that has been rewritten now that the communist guy has been removed,
right,
he shoots him in the head, and he's complaining about it, and the director is like telling him what has happened, and he's like, the studio really feels like we'd like to see someone, even like a good man, could be pushed past his limits. And And so he ends up becoming this John Wayne archetype, like anti-communist. And later on in the series, you see 200 years later in the post-apocalyptic world, he comes across this cassette, like this tape of the film, and you get to see the scene. And he actually says, like, "This is it for you, you commie bastard," and shoots him in the head. But he's like evolved as a character, and he's seen what his wife and like the corporation that she was working for is up to, and he's kind of horrified by it. And he goes to this meeting, like one of his actor friends who could be one of the Native American actors that John Wayne works with. He convinces him to come to this meeting. This other character from the series is hosting this meeting, and he gets up at one point and he's like, "This is about all the bullshit I can handle." And then she like talks him around and like convinces him to stay. And he's like, "This is communist nonsense." And she's like, "I'm not a communist. That's just a label they throw at people who aren't insane."
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit.
Speaking of that, like in 1952, John Wayne made this film called Big Jim McLean, in which he played this HUAC investigator who was basically hunting down communists in post-war Hawaii. And like, if you look at the posters, it's brilliant. It's basically Wayne. He looks like he's had a few, and like, he's in some sort of crazed frenzy. Like in all the posters, he's in a position where he looks like he's about to like throw a big slig at somebody. I haven't seen the film, but I imagine it's just like a drunk Wayne in a crazed frenzy going about Hawaii, punching people he just assumes are communists.
Yeah. Yeah, he's going after labor organizers or something.
Yeah, I have a few wee quotes here about what certain actors at that time had to actually say, or like little stories or things they had to say about John Wayne. So Ron Howard, who was very young at the time, he worked with him on Wayne's last film before he died, The Shootist. He said, "My most useful acting tip came from my pal John Wayne. Talk low, talk slow, and don't say too much." Dennis Hopper would say, "The one day he arrived on the set of True Grit and he wanted to know where that pinko Hopper was hiding. He was walking around with a gun at his hip, but I think he wanted to have a political discussion as opposed to committing actual manslaughter." Anyway, nothing ever came of it. That was just Duke. Kirk Douglas. "I did 4 movies with John Wayne. We were a strange combination. He was a Republican, I was a Democrat. We argued all the time. John Wayne was a star because he always played John Wayne. Frankly, he wasn't an excellent actor, but good heavens, what a star. It wasn't John Wayne who served the roles served John Wayne." Maureen O'Hara, infamous actress who starred opposite Wayne in The Shootist, she would say, "Speaking as an actress, I wish all actors would be more like Duke, and speaking as a person, it would be nice if all people could be as honest and genuine as he is. This is a real man." So there's a real contrast here. Obviously it feeds into that whole thing we're talking about, like the bigoted guy. He's like racist when it suits him. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at here?
It's weird with Wayne because it's like, did he really believe in all of those things, or was he using it because it was convenient at the time?
And
like,
part of his persona. Like it
exactly.
always represent this ultimate American.
It's like in real life, he's also playing a character.
Yeah,
he's not just being himself in real life. John Wayne is an image.
He is a real careerist. Like that is why he doesn't go to war. One of the reasons why he doesn't fight in the Second World War is that because it's taken him so long to get momentum in his career, he's worried if he steps away for any time, he'll lose momentum and he'll never have the career that he went on to have.
Yeah.
So like he's anxious about his career, and that's why he doesn't go to fight.
Yeah. I've one last quote here. It's from Charlton Heston, and he says, "There are actors who can do period roles and actors who can't. God knows John Wayne couldn't play a first century Roman." And that is in relation to, there's a film called The Greatest Story Ever Told. I think it was from the 60s. It's basically a 4-hour biopic of Christ, right? And at the very, very final scene of the film, it's the crucifixion. And the film ends basically when Christ dies on the cross. And John Wayne hasn't been in the film at all at this point. It's a final cameo. It's the last line of the film. The
My dad used to always talk about this.
Yep, same. And you just see Wayne with the spear as the Roman centurion. The final line of this epic 4-hour film of Christ is, Truly, he was the son of God.
Yeah, my dad would always be like, I think he was, I don't know if he was like trying to make a point that he was like a terrible actor or not, I can't remember, but he's like, yeah, truly that man must have been the son of God.
The American accent.
Yeah, he didn't change his voice at all, like just straight up.
But that's it, like John Wayne, like this complicated legacy, it's undeniably an integral part of the myth surrounding the Old West of America. And that myth, it's so often romanticized in Western films. Like you could argue that this image, it's been built to shape how we're expected to interpret this era of history in America. It serves to provide us with this narrative of what American values are supposed to be. You know, these tales of adventure and heroics and all that.
Yeah, and typically it's all bullshit.
Yeah, like for one...
But we should expect nothing less.
Yeah, like for one, the idea of the cowboy being this loner hero, you know, someone who embodies and symbolizes American values. But the reality is that like cowboys in general, they were poorly paid workers. A lot of African Americans, Hispanic people, immigrants in general, you got a lot of Germans and things like that. And in reality, you know, it's not romantic, but it's very, very hard and dangerous work at the same time. You could also talk about how Native Americans have often been portrayed in Western films like these mindless, crazed savages with no remorse or reason. Yeah, cruel. They're the primary antagonists a lot of the time, trying to fuck up the romantic white people narrative of the Old West.
Yeah. It's like the settlers did nothing wrong. They were just there minding their own business, and then these crazed savages burst in and just murder them all for no reason. It's like childish.
Yeah, like
childish.
For so long in film, their historical and cultural eradication and displacement, it just wasn't acknowledged. And you could also link this in with how the very landscape is presented. You know, this vast, untamed, untouched land, this empty land that's just ripe for the plucking. But before the arrival of Europeans in these lands, they were inhabited by the natives. You know, it's all bullshit. Like, you could go even further, argue the classic American Western films, they are like a form of propaganda in how they romanticize and promote these ideals and values, modeling myth and history so that it can all serve to align with certain agendas, whether it's political or cultural.
That's exactly what it is. It's creating this mythical version of the Old West where you can play out your current day fantasies about how you wish things were.
Like you can justify it nearly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. If we take the concept of even American exceptionalism, which is basically the belief that the United States is distinctive, exemplary compared to other nations and destined for this greatness.
Yeah, the whole film plays into the whole idea of American Westerns plays into their idea of manifest destiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is where the American ideal to conquer the whole land from sea to shining sea and spread American values.
But it's like we have this divine right to do so. You know, expand all over the continent, you know.
You get a good bit of that in The Searchers as well. Like there's a bit near the end where he would rather kill Debbie than let her live as one of the Indians, because to him she's soiled.
Unthinkable anymore.
Yeah, it's unthinkable. Yeah. It's like a fate worse than death. Yeah. But in reality, you know, a lot of the societies in America that existed before European settlers arrived were, in a certain sense, more civilized than European society at the time.
Yeah.
Like, there's really compelling evidence that the Enlightenment in Europe comes from South America, I believe, from Native American people. Basically, these Jesuit priests are out, you know, like proselytizing to the Native Americans ahead of colonization. They're kind of like the Bene Gesserit in June, right? So they're out there softening them up for colonization. You get a good bit of this in the new TV show Shogun. You get a bit of this, like the Jesuits softening up the population for Portuguese imperialism.
Also, Scorsese's film Silence.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't like, but I think it was more because I was expecting a Scorsese film, like a standard.
Oh yeah,
Scorsese,
it's like nothing
what
he's
the fuck
made.
is going on?
I've watched it twice, and the second time I thought I way preferred it because I knew what to expect that time.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It is a very good
I think
film.
I would probably have the same reaction as well. But anyway, So there's some books that were written by these Jesuit missionaries who were in the Americas based on conversations they had. And these books came back to Europe, and people like Voltaire and, like the key people in the Enlightenment had read these books. We know for a fact they'd read these books, and you could make a very strong argument that that's where they got the ideas that led to the Enlightenment. And then after the Enlightenment, you get a kind of counter-revolution, like a cultural counter-revolution with the Romantic period, which is what leads to the creation of nationalism and like fascism and stuff. It's like the reassertion of this kind of like, basically, enough of your facts and reality and logic. We would rather live in like a fantasy and play out these fantastical visions for ourselves
than face any sort of reality.
Exactly.
It makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm. So that's the precursor to all of this stuff that we're talking about now, with Wayne and this vision of Christian masculinity. It's very romantic.
Yeah, the whole West is very romantic.
The whole West is very romantic. So that's the kind of like intellectual tradition that this is coming from.
They've definitely tried to romanticize. I mentioned the Lost Cause movement earlier, and the idea of America during Reconstruction after the Civil War of being this almost desirable place to be, where people have the freedom to go wherever they want and set up their own fortune.
Yeah, well,
the idea that the Civil War was a lost cause from the start is complete nonsense. It's not true. The North did have certain advantages, but initially, like at the start of the war, that is not the case whatsoever.
The South did well at the start of the war because of the way they fought the war and because of the North's reluctance to fight. But it's sheer size of manpower. The South didn't. They were without a chance.
In gaming YouTube, you would call them like a glass cannon. One of the Yankee generals called them like hollow because they put all their men to the front initially, but then once you broke through that line, there was nobody there. There was nobody to replace those guys.
Especially when you look at the amount of soldiers in the South that fought for the North. There was every single state in the Confederacy sent units to fight for the North.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
With lack of resources, with lack of manpower, the South.
It's an incredibly complex war.
Apart from incredible luck from the way the war was fought, they had no chance of winning it.
Yeah. We'll come back to the Civil War. Actually,
apparently that's not true. Like, apparently they did have a chance to win it early on.
Yeah.
But after that point, with the North's superior manpower and superior like manufacturing capability,
real networks they had.
We'll come back to the Civil War actually. Another one I wanted to touch on when we were talking about sort of exceptionalism mod is you could look at traditional gender roles in these sort of films and how they're presented.
When instead of like suffering through whatever the woman has to say, he just like picks her up and throws her over his shoulder.
So like you have these like macho men who display their bravery and resilience, while women are generally domesticated or even in great peril, needing to be saved.
That trope is so powerful in that kind of propaganda.
It reinforces the patriarchy, and basically it makes these roles seem as though that's just the way it should be. Mm-hmm. This is just natural.
As I was mentioning earlier on, muscular Christianity, what they did in the creation of this mythical muscular Christian view of things was resurrect ideals from the antebellum South.
Yeah, Ted Turner.
These chivalric values.
That's the whole lost cause theory in itself. It's not that the war was a lost cause, but that
the ideals and the values.
That was, they actually had something to fight about rather than just slavery.
Yeah. But it's a states' rights issue. It's not slavery.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's an interesting one though to debate on a later pod, because
it definitely relates massively to John Wayne and his attitude.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into the film as well, because at the very start of the film, he's come home from war 3 years after it's ended, and of course he's been a Confederate, like he's been fighting for the Confederacy.
Yeah. I'm proud of it.
Yeah. And what does he say? Something about the oath.
Oh, he says a man's only good for one oath at a time.
Yeah, don't believe in surrenders.
And I took mine to the Confederate States of America.
Yes. So he's like he's completely unrepentant. He believes in the Confederacy and like reading between the lines what the Confederacy stood for, i.e. slavery and, racist system.
But yeah, of course, like I'm not saying, that all classic westerns adhere to these sort of tropes and ideologies, and the genre, it's certainly evolved as time has passed, with many contemporary westerns sort of acknowledging these ideas and subverting that traditional narrative. One of the earliest to sort of really try this, like not in like a contemporary stance, but they like have a go at it, was The Searchers. It presents us with a much more complex narrative than you would have got at that time and for quite a while after that. And yes, the film certainly, it does not fully deviate from the racial prejudices of that era, but it does shine a light on it, and it manages to provide to some degree a more complex portrayal of natives than many of the films at that time. Think about how in classic westerns it's very clear who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, whereas here there's so much ambiguity. Our main character, Ethan Edwards, he's basically driven by his lust for revenge, which is fueled by his deep-rooted racism towards the natives. While he seems to be on a mission to rescue his niece from the Comanche, he seems to be driven more by this fear that she may have been tainted in his eyes. Yeah, in having spent so much time with the Comanche. It's an incredibly complex portrayal of the main character of a Western in the 1950s, especially with Wayne in the lead. He was the fucking American hero, Like the character of Ethan, he really embodies that myth of the Old West. His destructive actions force us to sort of reconsider whether or not is he righteous in his quest. And that reflects the actions of the people who, in real life brought their brand of civilization to the West. When he discovers that his niece is somewhat assimilated with the Comanche, it's like a fucking red rag to a bull.
Yeah.
She's one of them.
Yeah, like
he's ready to kill her.
His first reaction is to try and shoot her in the head.
Yeah, and you could say this reflects the idea of manifest destiny, the need to reclaim from the savages at any cost.
Absolutely.
This is why The Searchers is so appealing. It invites you to really question and reconsider the reality of the Old West and the frontier, like the morality of it all. It brings a real complexity to it. So before we really get into the film, I want to know, Rory, you're a history guy. Like, what is the historical context? Like, where are we right now in American history? How did we get here, and why is it so important?
Well, The Searchers were set against the backdrop of the Texas Native American Wars, which, as we were talking about now, were set in Texas, 1968, the Great Plains.
1868.
Did I say 1968?
Yeah.
1868, we'll go back 100 years. And a very, very, very highly contested area. If we go back even before the Civil War, the Mexican Wars, it's right on the border there. We look at big events like the Alamo. Texas was in the center of all of this. Yeah. Texas obviously seceded to the Confederacy very early on in the process as well. They were part of the Confederacy from the start to the end. And we see quite clearly in John Wayne's attitude that it never really ended for him.
What's he doing in the 3 years?
It's such a mystery.
After the war?
It's very
have you got any speculation?
It's very ambiguous, as they find in the film, obviously.
Yeah. But what could he have been up to?
One thing that we see is the scene when, not long after John Wayne came home, and he's given me gifts to Debbie, to, what do you call it?
Lucy and the boy as well. Yeah.
But he gives Debbie his medal, and we know from the Civil War, Robert E. Lee said himself that the Confederacy didn't give any medals. There was no awards to anybody that was in the Confederate Army. That was a big thing that they did.
That's right.
It would be honour enough to be mentioned.
That was the real thing. They didn't have medals. It was just being mentioned in dispatches by Robert E. Lee. It was like the highest. That was your medal of honour.
Absolutely.
So we can't afford medals.
So the medal that he's given Lucy obviously hasn't come from that war. From the book itself, which is written by, let me double check,
Alan LeMay. I believe.
There's so many like returning themes in all of these episodes. Is he a relative of Curtis LeMay?
In the book, it mentions that it is a gold medal or medallion awarded by Emperor Maximilian of Mexico to mercenary soldiers who fought between 1865 and 67 for Maximilian's French forces against Mexican revolutionaries.
I had no idea Mexico had an emperor.
So 65 to 67, that's a couple of years anyway, that could be accounted for. And then as the film goes on, we see when the Reverend comes back, or when the Reverend enters initially, and he's talking about they've been hunting for somebody that is, what's the crime they've committed? Some sort of slaughter of,
I can't remember,
pig ranch or pig...
there are some crimes that have been committed, and he's talking about how you fit some of the description,
absolutely. So there's obviously speculation there that he could be living as a bit of an outlaw, and I haven't never fully accepted the war war's ended, not going home.
Yeah, there was like Confederate marauders for like a long time after the war ended.
Yeah, they just didn't believe it. Just didn't accept
That's
it.
the other thing, like Texas, it's always been such a highly contested area at this time. You had conflicts spanning back to like when the Spanish were fucking knocking about and the independent Mexican government. The idea was basically we need to colonize Texas to provide a protective buffer between Mexico and the natives, to a degree,
And the other thing about Texas is it's like the most independent of all the states. Like obviously every state in the Confederacy, they wanted to be independent from the North. It didn't like the idea of centralized government. But Texas was almost in a league of its own again. They were Texans first, Americans second,
There's a lot of like modern day libertarians love Texas.
Yeah, Texas could have been a country of its own. Like it's 5 times the size of the UK. It's absolutely
it's not crazy when you think about it. It's mental.
It's huge.
Those conflicts within Texas, they were fueled by this really deep animosity between settlers and natives, and there were so many slaughters on both sides. You look at Blood Meridian as a perfect example.
I was literally just going to say this movie is like a cleaned up version of Blood Meridian.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
John Wayne could be
Blood Meridian took it
to the judge.
The judge. A very cleaned up version of the judge.
Imagine John Wayne as the judge.
No.
That'd be hilarious.
Shave him clean.
Marlon Brando is the judge. Like fat aging
Brando in Apocalypse Now. Unprepared, hasn't read the script. Marlon Brando. Yeah.
Around the time that the film is set, we've got Native American tribes that have been pushed out of their lands that through this are then unable to raise cattle and farm beef the way they should be. And
beef was a major commodity after the Civil War.
And then a lot of them having to rely on US government agency beef, which is mentioned a couple of times in the film as well. These Native Americans have been unsettled from their land. We don't really get any...
They've been dispossessed.
Absolutely. We don't really get any motive in the film for the raid on Aaron's homestead.
It's very...
It's like revenge. You find out that Scar, he lost his sons.
He lost 2 sons.
White people, and like he's basically acting out his revenge. That's why it's a great like circle of violence between him and Ethan. It's like the cycle, the never-ending cycle of violence.
And that is what happens in settler-native conflict, which is what happened in America. It's happening now.
And
controversially, we could talk about in Palestine and Israel. I think that's exactly the same thing. It's a cycle of violence.
Yeah, the cycle.
You killed one of ours, so we kill one of yours, and it perpetuates itself endlessly.
Essentially.
Obviously, they're making the Native Americans seem a fearful people, a cruel people, but it's worth touching on as well that yes, in the 21st century, when we're looking at things, we see the Native Americans as the people that were displaced and have almost motive for any violence that they carry out. But the fear that we see in the searchers, like when Lucy screams when she realizes what's going on. What a lot of these tribes, especially if you look at the Comanche, they did some incredibly brutal things. And the fear
awful things on both sides.
Absolutely awful things on both sides. But I think in today's culture, it can always be easy to forget that the Native Americans were part of the conflict as well.
Oh, absolutely. No, I agree. I agree 100%. Like we said, it's an endless cycle. It's an endless cycle.
Where you apportion the blame is kind of like the settlers have more power. They're backed up by a government. They have guns. They have better technology. So you have to kind of weigh that, obviously we're not saying like the settlers were always right and everything.
No,
absolutely not. But like once you get into that cycle of violence where you're taking their land and they're retaliating and then you retaliate, you create this endless cycle of violence until one is basically wiped out. And then now you've got Americans, they're like doing land acknowledgements like, oh, this land used to belong to the like noble savage, like they're doing all this like
it's pathetic... like old people on the bus over here like, I remember these flats used to be fucking
like they're doing all this like performative bullshit and they're like so sad about it now that they fucking killed off most of them. But like it would have been a fringe position at the time to be like, can we just coexist with them? Like, do we have to murder them all? Do we have to take all their land? Can we not find some sort of compromise?
Looking at where, what do you call her? I keep on saying her. Alan LeMay. It's LeMay, but it makes me think it's female. Alan LeMay, having a look at where he got some of the inspiration for the characters in the novel and the story itself. If we look at his research notes, it's indicated that the story was inspired by Britton Johnson, who's actually African-American. who ransomed his captured wife and children from the Comanche in 1865.
Yeah.
Interesting.
He was eventually killed by other Native Americans later on in 71. But sort of beside the point.
You know, like the conquistadors in South America, like
the
Spanish and Portuguese, there was actually black conquistadors. There was
really?
I don't know if they were like former slaves, but like there ended up being black people fighting for the system that was enslaving their own people.
I know
they were like helping with the colonization.
I know
of
why
South
it's
America.
popped in my head, but there's an episode of Bear Grylls, Born Survivor, where he's in like a place where the conquistadors landed or something. He was always like, the conquistadors first landed here in 18, whatever. He keeps mentioning the conquistadors. This is where they landed. He's like exploring that like region. There was another one. It's been suggested, like The Searchers. It was inspired by the kidnapping of this 9-year-old girl called Cynthia Ann Parker by the Comanche after like raiding her family home. And Cynthia, she would spend 24 years with the Comanche. Like she had children and all, married a war chief before eventually being rescued against her will by Texas Rangers. Like
and her uncle.
Cynthia's, James Parker.
James Parker, who could very much be the inspiration for Ethan, spent his whole life searching for her. And he was basically Ethan out there searching.
He's searching. That's what the film's all about, searching.
Seems like he never learns there's such a thing as a critter will just keep coming on. So we'll find him in the end, I promise you. We'll find him.
Colonels, Cornheads, we're going to wrap it there for this week. This is a gargantuan episode, and we don't want to stuff it all down your gullet at once. We want to keep you gagging for more. So join us next week.
Regardless of what you do, you're gagging in that scenario by the sounds of it.
Essentially. So join us next week for part 2 of The Searchers, and we'll see you then.